Hello and welcome back to Nadya's Identity Files. I have with me the lovely Erin Pitcher. Thank you so much for being with me today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
And for your patience and drinking shakes outside at Body Energy Club. You liked it though, yeah? It was yummy.
It was delicious. Perfect way to start the afternoon.
Which one did you get again?
I had the banana almond butter dream.
Banana almond butter dream.
Yeah.
I love how like names of shakes are so like exotic and dramatic when it's just like a banana or like peanut butter.
That's how they can charge $15.
That's how they can charge like $15. Exactly. Well, I'm so glad that you're here with me to talk about social impact and virtual realities, an area of the tech world that I'm not very familiar with and that I'm hoping you can educate me and the audience a bit about, because it's still very elusive to many. So if you could just tell me a bit about your journey into this world and what drew you to it.
Yeah, so I started in traditional media. I moved out to California 2.5 years ago with my husband and 2 other co-founders, and we moved here with the dream of kind of infiltrating the media with positive, uplifting messages and supporting the kinds of organizations that we really wanted to see thrive in the world by empowering their media strategy. And through the course of our being in Los Angeles, we started hearing the buzz about virtual reality and how that was kind of going to be the next wave of the media. And with what we do, a lot of our media is geared towards creating transformational moments for our audiences that really leave them inspired and uplifted and impact them in a really beautiful, emotional way in order to create like inspired action in their life. Yeah, and virtual reality, as it were, is a very experiential medium, and it has such tremendous potential to create lasting impact in the experiencer's life. So if you can imagine anything that you're experiencing in your current day-to-day reality, your brain doesn't actually register the difference between having a virtual experience, so one that is completely 3D immersive inside of a headset, and in actual everyday life, your brain registers those as the exact same thing. So you can imagine the impact of experiential learning that's brought into this medium and how powerful and impactful it can be in storytelling, because rather than just experiencing like a two-dimensional story, you actually get to participate as if you were there. And your body and your brain interprets it as if you were actually there.
Wow.
Yeah.
Can you talk about some of the stories, like maybe a specific story that you thought that used the technology of VR and made a difference in a client's or life or a person's life that you know?
One of our own?
Anyone. Story that you're familiar with?
Yeah, definitely. So there's a landmark piece that was produced, and of course now the name of the production organization is not, it's eluding me.
Yeah.
But the piece was called Clouds Over Cedra. And the premise was that you got to experience a day in the life of a Syrian refugee, a young girl who was not more than 8 or 9 years old. And you got to experience her everyday, day-to-day reality of what it would be like living in a refugee environment with, you know, bomber planes flying overhead pretty consistently, and navigating the challenges of childhood, but having to do that in an environment that's highly unstable, where, you know, not only is it kind of a question where your next meal is coming from and whether or not you're going to have a roof over your head that night, but you have the added threat of being in a war zone. So it was this really tender-hearted story as told from the perspective of this 8-year-old.
So when someone is immersed in the story, it's as though they are experiencing it from the perspective of the child?
Yeah, so this particular piece had a voiceover component, and you actually saw the child, you saw the girl in the piece. However, first-person POV is something that the virtual reality world and community is currently exploring. It has the capacity to be an extraordinarily powerful storytelling technique, because if you can imagine getting to walk a mile in somebody else's shoes fully and experience what they're experiencing and have some of the same thought processes, what that might do to not only expanding your own identity, but your perspective about the world that you live inside of.
How do you think that this is going to make a larger impact with bringing communities together that don't understand each other? I mean, obviously storytelling for over the course of millennia has served as a way for us to empathize with people that are different than us and understand different ways of living. Yet, in spite of this oversaturation now in story, I mean, as you heard earlier, like I'm very fixated on story and identity, and that's really what I do as well, just different.
Yeah, I love your project that you're working on.
Thank you. Thank you so much. But I feel like in spite of so much being accessible to us, we've become increasingly disconnected. So do you think that because people are very immersed in technology now, that VR is the answer to getting people to have more compassion?
Yeah, that's definitely a conversation that's revolving inside the community. The empathy machine is kind of the big buzzword for the overarching technology. I think a couple things. That the technology does have an enormous capacity, which we've already seen as demonstrated time and again through just the experiences people are having, as well as scientific research that has been conducted already, in being able to genuinely produce a deeper sense of empathy, a deeper sense of connection with the characters, with yourself, with the world that you live inside of. And so, yeah, I think that there is tremendous potential for this technology to extend our awareness and our feeling of compassion to people who are potentially outside of our normal sphere of existence.
Right.
So it definitely has the capacity to do that. Now, whether or not it's the end all be all, I think there are some additional components and some amazing things that are happening in the alternative technology realms, like with artificial intelligence and machine learning that are going to be incorporated here, and biofeedback. And I think realistically, some people say we've transitioned, out of the age of information. I think we're still somewhat in the heat of it, because we're really just getting a small piece of all the informational, the inputs that are going to take our transition
Who's
to this more
saying
evolved
that we're out of
society.
the age of information?
Whatever futurist you talk to has their own perspective and has their own thought on what age we're in, or what we're transitioning into or out of.
And it goes back to what we were talking about even before we came on air, is these ideas of labels, and how in some manners they can be very empowering and invigorating and exciting and push us forward into new realms of thinking, but then they can also be somewhat limiting in other ways.
Absolutely. As a society overall, and I thought you had a really great point to kind of counter my point, but as a society overall, I think we're really moving into a time and an age where we can transcend a lot of those labels. There is definitely some very empowering components about being able to identify with a particular group of people or a particular way of being that can give you a real sense of grounding inside of yourself. And at the same time, when we're using those labels to evaluate the world in which we live, they can be highly limiting. And in fact, they can be exclusionary. Because if for instance, I'm seeing you only as a woman, well, that's leaving out, 99.9% of who and what you are. Right. You're this like highly capable, infinite being.
Right.
So,
but I think that the point that I make, of course, like with this show, with Nadya's Identity Files, and talking about just the deep dynamics of identity, is that nobody has or carries one identifier with them.
Totally.
We have so many, and as long as we can see each one as kind of like a unique thread, almost like a part of our DNA, and understand the richness is unique to us, but it still connects us to other groups of people in different ways. I think that that's important.
Most definitely. And VR is going to be actually a very interesting piece of this puzzle, given that AI is going to be replacing a lot of our jobs, and suddenly humans aren't going to have to work for a living. So you're going to have beings who need to find a sense of purpose without having a work environment in which to do that. And virtual reality basically provides a limitless and infinite landscape in which to find and create for yourself a new sense of purpose that's outside of the work realm.
Interesting. And your company specifically is based in impact and empathy.
Yeah, at the intersection of empathy and impact. Yeah.
I love it. So, I mean, have you always thought in your mind, maybe 10 years ago, that you would end up in this area of work? If someone had told you, yeah, you're going to be putting headsets over people's heads and immersing them in stories.
I would have called them crazy. Absolutely, I would have called them crazy. I mean, it would have been a fantasy of mine. I've always been really fascinated by technology and just a curious mind in general, but no, absolutely not.
How has it contributed to your identity? This whole process and work and immersion in these different stories and just everything that you're doing.
Yeah, it's interesting because I actually almost have gone through this systematic dissection and deconstruction of what my identity is. And where I'm at kind of now in my evolution is I'm at this, like, I'm searching for this core piece that doesn't have words, that can't be identified with language, but can only be identified in feeling and in understanding.
It's beautiful. Oh my gosh, you would love my friend MC Pan, who's like a hip hop yogi.
Oh yes.
Oh my gosh, I have to introduce you.
Yes, love it.
Because that's exactly what they often say is removing all of these external layers.
Yeah, and then it's also once you get to that piece, then it's kind of like identity serves as this really magical way of engaging in the world as kind of an artist. You can try on different hats. It's like once you get to the raw nakedness of who you are, then it's like suddenly I want to put on a hot pink sweater, or suddenly I want to put on a captain's hat, or suddenly I want to experience the world from this context.
Yeah.
And so it's like broadening this view that you have of the world, and it's so interesting because and amazing really, because it really all just funnels you back to this understanding that we all kind of come from the same piece.
Oh,
we're all cut from the
human
same
beings.
cloth. Exactly.
That's right.
We're all human beings. We're all part of this planet. We're all part of this earth. We're all part of this universe. It's all embedded in us, and so it's just like it's this systematic dissection, and then almost like an artist paints with different color paints, like just trying on
or like
different
an
elements.
unpeeling.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love it. Well, thank you so much, Erin, for all of your insights. I know there's so much I can still learn from you, and I'm excited to check out your company and get some VR action going on. Which
Definitely.
I'm thinking like, wow, I've never done it before. I've been very intrigued, but a little apprehensive, only because I'm a migraine sufferer, y'all. But things are moving and advancing so fast, so I don't think that will be an issue.
Absolutely, not for much longer.
No. So thank you, and when we come back, we'll speak with Natasha, and then we'll have a roundtable conversation just to dig into these issues a little bit more as a collective. Stay tuned.